listening to The World Tonight with Robin Lustig. Some of the most notorious terrorism suspects in Britain will find out next week if the European Court of Human Rights will sanction their extradition to the United States to face charges. Abu Hamza, the radical Islamist preacher who turned a North London mosque into a recruitment centre for violent jihad, is among them, as is Harun Aswat, who's accused of trying to set up a terrorist training camp in Oregon in the United States. Another is Babar Ahmad. Like the others, a British citizen wanted by the Americans to face a range of charges, from conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists to money laundering. He's been held in a British jail pending extradition for nearly 8 years. The BBC's been trying to gain access to Babar Ahmad in prison to interview him, but had been blocked by the Ministry of Justice. Now, a High Court judge has ruled that Mr Ahmad's story should be heard. Our Home Affairs correspondent Dominic Kashiani went to Long Lartin prison in Worcestershire to meet Babar Ahmad.
It is an offence to enter this establishment with a mobile phone or...
Long Lartin prison in Worcestershire, one of Britain's highest security jails.
Good morning, Dominic. How are you? You all right?
Take a seat.
Thanks.
And locked up inside is Babar Ahmad, the man that the government said the BBC couldn't meet. But we challenged that decision in the High Court. Judges said Babar Ahmad's story should be heard.
I've been in prison now for nearly 8 years without trial. I'm facing extradition to the US and the rest of my life in solitary confinement. I've never been questioned about the allegations against me. I've never been shown the evidence against me. But I think it's fair to say that I'm fighting for my life and I'm running out of time.
His battle has left him holding a record nobody would want. No British citizen in modern times has been held for longer without trial than Babar Ahmad. In just 5 days' time, the European Court of Human Rights will deliver one of its most important decisions since 9/11. Can men like Babar Ahmad be extradited? He's almost 38 and has been fighting extradition to the United States for more than 7.5 years. He's held on a special wing for 6 Muslim prisoners, all with similar cases.
In a way, it's like living on death row. It's like you're living every day for a tomorrow that might or might never come. There's prisoners all around me who have release dates. Even if it's 10 years in the future, they have a date. Detention without trial is the most unimaginable type of psychological torture that anyone could think of.
Babar Ahmad was first arrested in 2003 in a Scotland Yard counter-terrorism operation. 6 days later, he was released without charge. The Met later admitted he'd been assaulted during that arrest and paid him £60,000 in compensation. The officers involved were acquitted at trial, but in August 2004 he was arrested again, and this time he was wanted by America. The US authorities accuse him of heading an online terrorism support cell that provided material support to the Taliban and Chechen Mujahideen. Federal prosecutors say that from the mid-1990s, Babar Ahmad ran a website known as Azam.com. It was the first site in English dedicated to the Mujahideen, sending the call of jihad through cyberspace. It had a thriving publishing arm, distributing videos and books. This was in the days before online banking. Payment was to a mysterious London box address.
For the one who tasted the sweetness of jihad cannot take pleasure in the worldly life.
The Martyrs of Bosnia was one of Azam's first major productions. The exceptionally graphic film told the story of Muslims who laid down their lives in holy war, largely by showing what remained of them after they'd gone to paradise.
Had previously participated in the Afghan jihad.
Evan Coleman is an internet extremism consultant based in New York who studied Azam. If Babar Ahmad is extradited, he's likely to give evidence.
There had never been a site like this that had a direct line in, not just to radicals or extremists, but people who were movers and shakers in the world of jihad and the mujahideen. They weren't internet mujahideen, they were real mujahideen.
Evan Coleman shows me one grisly Azam video. It's a report from the Chechen front line. A mujahideen commander is trying to make a shell-shocked Russian soldier stand up. When the man collapses, the commander machine guns him to death. The film's editor adds a devotional soundtrack celebrating what's happened. I asked Babar Ahmad about this video.
If there was anything on there that broke any law of the United Kingdom, or if there was anything in there that was wrong, I don't understand for the last 16 years where the police and Crown Prosecution Service have been.
But in our interview, he revealed he wasn't just another British Muslim growing up in a changing world. He was prepared to fight for the right cause, Bosnia. In 1992, he left the comforts of middle-class London because he was horrified by the ethnic cleansing of Muslims. He arrived as an aid worker and left as a veteran of the Bosnian army.
I was sent to different towns and villages that were besieged by the Serbs. I took up arms and there were battles, and I helped to defend towns that were under attack against people that were attacking women and children. I helped to defend against those people.
Now, how did you feel taking up arms?
Any of us would do anything to defend our families and our homes. And here were defenseless people to whom horrific things were happening, and everyone was just sitting, and the international community were having conferences and negotiations and talks. No one was really actually doing anything to stop the slaughter of the innocents.
He was lucky to escape Bosnia alive. In one battle, he suffered multiple shrapnel wounds. He says he went on to work in an orphanage in Chechnya, another major Muslim cause. The two conflicts were turning points for Muslim political identity in the West. Many young people signed up to the idea of a global brotherhood under attack, and it was that raw emotion that Al-Qaeda later tapped into. What's your view of Al-Qaeda?
I have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda has nothing to do with my case. My position is that killing innocent people is absolutely, I believe that to be wrong, regardless of who does it and what is the justification for it.
But that's not the picture that the Americans paint of Babar Ahmad in their publicly available indictment. The documents accuse him of covertly running the Azam.com website and say there is a trail of evidence that leads them to London. So how is it that the Americans claim jurisdiction? Well, the short answer to that can be found here in the small town of Trumbull, about an hour's drive north of New York. It's a pretty unlikely place for a terrorism conspiracy, but the bland grey building in front of me is an internet service provider that once hosted Azam.com. The alleged crimes were on computers in the UK, but the websites were legally based here, and that's why they want to put him on trial. Babar Ahmad's lawyers say the US case overwhelmingly relies on material seized in London. They say the Crown Prosecution Service never got to see all the evidence before it decided he couldn't be charged. They say their client should be prosecuted in Britain. But the US indictment claims wider jurisdiction, including an alleged conspiracy with a US Navy sailor that could have endangered battleships in the Gulf. They say that Azam wasn't a British operation, but an international one, passing cash to the front line of jihad.
Back in 2003 or 4, it became pretty clear that Mr. Ahmad had used websites in Connecticut, as I recall.
Admiral James Loy was the number 2 at the Department for Homeland Security in 2004. He says the US has the right to pursue Babar Ahmad, and it was exactly the kind of case that the US-UK extradition deal was designed for.
Material on those websites that, in the mind of US authorities, had transgressed across the line of transnational terrorism laws. This is a new realm. This is a new era, if you will, that demands international cooperation associated with crimes that have international implications. The Ahmad case is that case of the moment.
An independent review of extradition for the Home Office backed the treaty. It said British judges don't need the discretion to decide where a suspect should be put on trial. Theresa May, the Home Secretary, is looking at its findings. But whatever the government decides, next Tuesday's European Court judgment will define how far the arm of US law enforcement can reach into Europe. David Raskin is a former federal prosecutor in New York. He worked on most of the British terror cases now before European judges. He says Babar Ahmad's extradition would be fair and just.
He would go through the normal process that a criminal case goes through, which means he would have the opportunity to assert all the arguments that any other defendant would get to assert, and he'd be accorded all of the rights, the many, many rights that are guaranteed to criminal defendants under the United States Constitution, which is a very, very generous document.
The Americans say that the Azam.com website, which they allege that you ran, was used to recruit young British Muslims in the West for jihad.
I've never been questioned about this allegation. I've never been shown the evidence I urge the DPP to look at that evidence and to look at the case that was taken by the police in December 2003 and to please put me on trial in this country so that I have the opportunity to clear my name and to end this nightmare.
The British terrorism suspect Babar Ahmad talking to Dominic Kashani. Well, Babar Ahmad has insisted all along that if there is evidence against him, it should be tested in a British court, as he is a British citizen, and if he did commit a criminal offence, he did so on British soil. So why hasn't he been charged here? I asked the extradition law specialist Julian Knowles, QC.
The UK adopts a very supine attitude so far as the US is concerned in extradition matters. It's a partnership, but the US is very much the dominant partner. And where you have crimes that can be tried either in the UK or the US, the track record shows that the UK adopts a very hands-off attitude and lets the US be in the driving seat and take control.
But do you believe that there actually is evidence that would have enabled the Crown Prosecution Service to bring charges here had they been so minded?
Oh, undoubtedly. We have a very broad range of terrorist-related offences that cover activity here that may have an effect anywhere in the world. So the fact that he may have been advocating the recruiting of terrorists or terrorist money anywhere in the world isn't a problem. What is a problem is that the UK does not actively prosecute people where other countries say they've got a claim. And what this UK, through the CPS, should be doing is saying, where is the real criminality here? And I think in Babar Ahmad's case, the real criminality is what he was doing on his computers in the UK.
But what you're suggesting is that if the US prosecuting authorities say to the UK, we think this man should be tried over here, the UK just says, OK, then fine?
No, I think in any case you have a balance of considerations. You have to look at where was the crime or the intended crime going to take place. You have to balance that against where is the evidence. You have to balance that against where does the person live. You have to balance that against where did the real criminality, the actions in the crime take place. So it's always a balancing exercise. In Babar Ahmad's case, I think when you consider that the only real US link is it just so happened that the computer servers were based in the US, that provides a pretty tenuous link, and all the other factors really point in favour of trial in the UK.
But what the CPS themselves say is that at the time that the decision was made not to prosecute here, they were aware of the nature of the evidence in the possession of the US, but the entirety of the evidence was never subject to review in this country, as it formed part of the case built by the US and was held there. The suggestion there is that they didn't have as much evidence as the US authorities had.
Well, I find that a very feeble justification. We have an ability under our law, under what are called mutual assistance laws, to say to other countries, please can we see what evidence you have? And countries like America should and are under an obligation to show the evidence to the CPS. So it isn't really a proper justification for the CPS to say, oh, we had no evidence, it was all held by the US.
They could have asked for it if they'd wanted to.
They could have asked for it if they'd wanted to, exactly.
The extradition law specialist Julian Knowles, QC. Well, we did ask the US Embassy for an interview about all this. No one was available. We have, though, had statements from both the Crown Prosecution Service and the Metropolitan Police. The CPS said the evidence found in the UK and submitted to the CPS by the Metropolitan Police Service, even if it had potentially amounted to an offence of collecting information likely to be useful for a terrorist purpose, amounted to only a small fraction of the criminality alleged against Babar Ahmad by the US. The CPS dealt with the extradition request completely separately to the question of a domestic prosecution, as the roles are very different. This is normal practice. The CPS extradition team saw some material from the US, but only what was required to seek extradition. The extradition process does not require that all the evidence held by the requesting country is reviewed by the UK courts. And the Met statement said the Metropolitan Police Service carried out their investigation strictly in accordance with UK law. This process involved close liaison with the Crown Prosecution Service. We completely reject any suggestion of impropriety. All extradition requests made to the United Kingdom are subject to the Extradition Act and any other relevant legislation. The CPS acts as the representative of the requesting judicial authority in extradition proceedings. 4 MPS police officers were acquitted by a jury of assaulting Babar Ahmad after they heard evidence that did not support his account of events following his arrest, and a misconduct hearing found that there was no case to answer.